those who are on top, their primary job as the person on top or the entity on top, their primary responsibility is to stay on top. That's to prevent you from getting up there. In terms of regulatory capture, you're biting your tongue, which is understandable because you're dealing with that. The primary banking regulator is the Federal Reserve in the U.S. The largest or the most powerful influential bank in the U.S. is JP Morgan. What relationship does the CEO and chairman of JP Morgan have with their primary regulator? He sits on the board of the New York Federal Reserve. You can't compete going through the regular channels. It's not going to happen.
Jamie Dimon is on the governing body of the Federal Reserve. So let me get this straight. The guy who's in charge of one of the big banks is also in charge of the organization that's supposed to be applying oversight to the big banks. Yeah, it's kind of literally like putting the fox in charge of the hen house.
That Jamie Dimon is on the board of the New York Fed is just very consistent with the origins of the Fed, which was this bargain that created a semi-government, semi-private central bank.
The Federal Reserve was set up in the wake of an enormous financial crisis in 1905, in which Wall Street melted down, the economy started to melt down, and there was no Federal Reserve.
At the time of that crisis, the policy response came solely from private bankers centered around J.P. Morgan,
who was the most influential banker, most powerful banker in the country, essentially rallied other large banks in New York to provide the emergency lending needed to get the economy back on its feet. That drew the attention of lots of people who asked the question, why are we turning over the health of the economy in terms of its recovery to J.P. Morgan and a handful of other wealthy bankers? Because it's quite clear that Morgan made an enormous amount of money in the way that he structured the recovery. When the Federal Reserve was then set up, the Republicans and Democrats, you may have heard about this, didn't trust one another enough to believe that if it was a directly supervised entity, that politics wouldn't enter in. And the bankers were very reluctant, for their own reasons, to join a system that risked that kind of political pressure on them from elected officials in Washington. So the bank was set up as nominally independent.
7 years ago, the Federal Reserve is a totally different animal than it is now. Right now, the Federal Reserve, the closest approximation could be a gigantic, dynamic hedge fund with unlimited leverage capability and the inability to be taken to task by its shareholders and investors. The very fabric of financial transactions in banking is now changed dramatically. The issue is most don't know it. Even the bankers and the banking regulators don't know it. We've had talk of decentralization. We're building our product. It's not decentralized, not centralized. It's fully distributed. In other words, you have control of all your assets. When you do any transaction, the assets are either with you or in contract with the blockchain. You don't need a bank, you don't need a circle to bring you Bitcoin circle, you don't need anybody. You do all your banking functions through the blockchain, you always have control.